Pressure spike in line 12. The warning speaker cracked above my head with a voice too calm for the way the pipe was screaming 6 inches from my face. I had one glove welded halfway to a ruptured intake collar, my left shoulder jammed beneath a brace, my bad ear turned uselessly toward the alarm as if it might suddenly remember how to hear. It didn't. All I got from that side was the old dead silence. The other side gave me everything. The hiss of superheated gas. The low-frequency hum of the fleet's belly. The metallic tick, tick, tick of a pressure joint deciding whether today was the day it finally killed somebody. I clenched my teeth around a breath that tasted like hot iron and acid cleaner, then drove the welding torch back into the seam. Blue light burst across the underside of the warship. Not royal blue. Not ceremonial cobalt. Working blue. The kind that lived down here with the grease, the crack bolts, the patched conduits, and men like me who only got called human when something needed fixing by hand. The torch snarled in my grip. Sparks jumped across my visor and died against the scarred plate of my suit, tiny white stars sliding over burns that had been there so long they felt less like wounds and more like old weather. My chest tightened. I ignored it. That was the first rule of the lower decks. Pain was a pressure gauge. You checked it, measured it, and kept moving unless it hit red. Mine had been red for years. Manual seal incomplete, the speaker said. No kidding, I muttered. My voice came out rough, half buried under the respirator mask strapped crooked over my jaw. The left side never sealed right anymore. Acid vapor had warped the hinge 2 campaigns ago, back when Command still pretended lower deck welders were issued replacement gear before funerals. I shifted my boot on the grated floor. The whole tunnel groaned under me. 30 feet overhead, beyond layers of armored decking and pressure foam, the upper fleet was celebrating diplomacy. Crystal walkways. Gold-trimmed uniforms. Clean oxygen. Warm light. People who had never had to judge a leak by smell alone. Down here, the ceiling hung low enough to scrape my tank. Pipes ran like rusted ribs along both walls, sweating coolant and old chemical frost. Every few seconds, a valve somewhere in the dark released a tired hiss, like the ship itself was trying not to panic. I finished the seal with a hard drag of the torch. The line snapped from orange to stable blue. Pressure dropped. The pipe stopped screaming. For half a second, there was almost peace. Then the glass corridor above me lit up. I saw her reflection first. A streak of pale radiance sliding across the black oil pool near my boots. Then the whole maintenance shaft filled with white, violet, and impossible silver. I looked up through the reinforced inspection panels and saw the royal delegation passing overhead. They didn't walk like crew. Crew moved with the ship. Crew bent around vibration, compensated for deck tilt, listened with their knees when the engines changed mood. The LARSAT delegation floated through the corridor like the laws of mass had been written for someone else. At the center of them was the ambassador. Tall. Still. Perfect in the cruel way expensive things are perfect. Her body carried a thin bioluminescent glow beneath a layered diplomatic mantle that looked spun from moonlight and circuitry. Along her back, 6 liquid nano-silk arms drifted in parallel arcs, each one bright with electric threads, weaving patterns in the air faster than any human hand could twitch. They weren't arms the way mine were arms. Mine were leverage, scar tissue, trembling tendons, damaged joints, brute force held together by habit. Hers were mathematics. 6 living streams of luminous motion, bending without friction, dividing and recombining like glowing rivers of command code. They touched nothing. They did not need to. Every strand whispered through invisible fleet networks, adjusting shield harmonics, traffic routes, translation fields, security locks. All while she barely moved her head. Behind her, human officers followed at a respectful distance, faces stiff with the kind of admiration that always looked too close to fear. I lowered the torch. Not out of respect. Because the heat gauge on line 12 was still unstable, and if I kept burning the collar, the whole intake might kick back through my mask. The ambassador paused above the inspection panel. Just one step. But the corridor seemed to pause with her. Her 6 nano-silk arms shortened slightly, curling away from the lower deck grime visible beneath the glass. As if the soot could crawl up and touch her. As if the residue of men like me carried a disease. Her eyes found me. Cold. Prismatic. More lens than mercy. For a moment, I saw myself reflected in them. A stocky high-pressure welder in a torn hazard suit, one audio receiver cracked, chest plate blackened, gloves patched with emergency tape, boots magnetized to a floor nobody important ever visited. A carbon thing at the bottom of a shining empire. Her lips never moved. The translation system spoke for her through the corridor speakers, smooth and sterile. Another obsolete carbon mass. A joint lever locomotion system drowning in mechanical friction, contaminating purified atmosphere with primitive thermal residue. The officers didn't laugh. That almost made it worse. They just looked past me. Like the ship had made a noise. Like something in the plumbing had complained. My hand tightened around the torch until the handle creaked. For one stupid second, I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell her that her perfect fleet still needed men with ruined hearing to crawl under its ribs. I wanted to tell her that polished algorithms didn't mean much when a valve fused shut at 900 degrees Fahrenheit and the only thing between command and vacuum was a wrench, a glove, and somebody too stubborn to die. But the lower decks taught you another rule. Never argue with someone whose shadow has guards. So I swallowed the heat in my throat. I looked back at line 12. And I said nothing. The delegation moved on. Her light slid away from the oil. The tunnel dimmed again, shrinking back into red work lamps and ugly shadows. I exhaled slowly. My bad ear rang with nothing. My good ear caught something else. Not the pipe. Not the coolant. Something deeper. A tremor moved through the hull, faint enough that a clean officer might have missed it. But my boots felt it. My knees felt it. The welded seam under my palm gave a tiny answering tick. I froze. Another pulse followed. Low. Distant. Wrong. The fleet's main engines always hummed at a steady rhythm, a huge controlled heartbeat pushing millions of tons through dead space. This was not that. This was a ripple from outside the formation. A soundless pressure wave touching the armored body of the ship before the alarms had language for it. I turned toward the far wall, where an old diagnostic panel flickered under a film of black dust. Outer defense grid, stable. Then the word stuttered. Stable. Stable. A thin yellow line crawled across the screen. Acoustic anomaly detected beyond fleet perimeter. My mouth went dry. Above me, behind 3 decks of armor and glass, the royal procession continued toward the diplomatic chamber, all shining robes and fearless posture. Down here, the ship breathed harder. The lights blinked once. A valve coughed steam. Somewhere far forward, metal answered metal with a long, mournful screech that traveled through the floor and climbed up my spine. I knew that sound. Every lower deck worker knew it. It was the sound a ship made before officers started lying. The distant alarm began as 3 short tones. Not evacuation. Not impact. Just a warning ping, polite and careful, meant for people who believed warnings arrived before disaster. Ping. 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 I stared up through the inspection glass where the ambassador's glow had vanished. Yeah, I whispered, dragging my tool crate off the wall and locking the strap across my shoulder. The hull shuddered again. Harder this time. Dust fell from the ceiling in grey streams. The pressure gauge on line 12 jumped back toward red. My torch was still hot in my hand. My scars burned under the suit. And somewhere above me, the creature who had called me obsolete was walking straight into the cleanest part of a dying ship. The first real siren opened its throat. This one was not polite. It screamed. The siren hit full volume before the deck finished shaking. It tore through the lower passage in one long metallic howl, bouncing off pipes, grates, pressure doors, and the inside of my helmet until my good ear filled with white noise. My bad ear gave me nothing. That almost scared me more. I grabbed the wall rail as the entire corridor jumped sideways beneath my boots. Not trembled. Jumped. The welded seam I had just sealed flashed red on the gauge, and line 12 screamed again, louder this time, a shrill pressure cry that sounded almost alive. Then the first impact arrived. A white blast of force slammed through the fleet from somewhere above and forward. The lights vanished. Came back red. Vanished again. For half a breath, the whole ship became darkness, alarm, and weight. My tool crate swung from my shoulder and smashed into my ribs. I hit the grating hard, sliding 3 feet through hot condensation and black dust before my magnet boots caught with a brutal clank. The floor plates buckled under my palms. One of them rose half an inch. Then another. The lower deck was flexing. That was not supposed to happen. Warships were built to take hits across miles of reinforced hull, not shiver like old sheet metal under a hammer. Above me, the glass diplomatic corridor erupted in emergency light. The royal delegation scattered. Human officers ran first. Of course they did. The Larsat ambassador did not run. She stood at the center of the corridor while everyone else lost formation around her, her 6 nano-silk arms unfolding in a perfect luminous fan. Even through 3 inches of reinforced glass, I saw the arrogance in it. She was not escaping. She was commanding. Those liquid arms wrote glowing symbols through the air, each strand splitting into smaller streams of violet and cobalt, tapping invisible systems, summoning doors, shields, lifts, drones, sealed paths, clean exits. Pretty work. Useless work if the ship was already losing its spine. The second impact proved me right. It came from below this time, or maybe the force just traveled wrong through the damaged frame. The whole corridor over my head twisted with a sound like a giant wrench tearing open a locked hatch. Glass panels spiderwebbed. Support ribs snapped out of alignment. A cargo lift shaft 30 feet ahead blew open, vomiting sparks and pressure smoke into the passage. I pushed myself up. Move, I rasped, though nobody above could hear me. Another shock wave rolled through. The inspection glass cracked in a long white line between us. The ambassador finally looked down. Not at me. At the fracture. Her arms accelerated, writing faster, brighter, more desperate. A defensive shell flickered around her body, thin and elegant, a pearly membrane of high-grade royal shielding. Then it stuttered. Once. Twice. Her head turned sharply, as if something impossible had insulted her. The ship answered with a low dying hum. Every automatic door along the lower deck began slamming shut. Boom. 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 Emergency bulkheads dropped one after another, sealing compartments in a chain reaction that raced toward me like iron thunder. I ran. My boots tore loose from the grating with each step, magnets whining, legs burning, lungs dragging in air that tasted hotter by the second. The safe route was aft. 2 turns, 1 ladder, 1 pressure hatch. I knew it blind. Every lower deck worker knew their escape path better than their own birthday. But the blast had changed the geometry. A conduit stack collapsed across the first turn in a spray of blue coolant vapor. The vapor hit the red work lamps and flashed silver, boiling into steam at nearly 300 degrees Fahrenheit. I skidded back before it reached my mask. The heat kissed the front of my visor. My breath caught. No aft route. I spun toward the central incline. Up. Toward the command annex. Toward the glass corridor. Toward her. Another siren layered over the first, deeper and uglier. Hull breach warning. Then another. Outer defense grid failure. Then the one nobody wanted to hear. Primary lift shaft compromised. The ship was not under attack anymore. It was being opened. Somewhere outside, the parasite machines were carving through armor like patient insects through dead wood. The deck pitched down. I slammed shoulder first into a wall. My tool crate burst open, spilling clamps, cable seals, ceramic washers, and my old rusted nut wrench across the grating. I lunged for the wrench before I thought about it. Muscle memory. You can drop pride. You can drop orders. You never drop the tool that still works when the smart systems die. Above me, the diplomatic corridor floor gave way. Not all at once. It sagged first. A beautiful, expensive strip of transparent alloy bending under the weight of panic, cracked light, and royal confidence. The ambassador's delegation tried to retreat through a side hatch. The hatch flashed gold. Then red. Then dead black. Locked. Her 6 arms struck the air again, each nano-silk stream lashing toward the sealed interface with surgical precision. Nothing opened. I saw the moment her certainty bent. Small. Almost invisible. A tightening around the eyes. A pause too long between commands. The kind of pause that gets people killed down here. A human officer pounded the hatch with both fists. The ambassador turned on him, and the translation speakers above me spat her voice into the lower deck through static. Stand away. Royal systems will restore corridor control in milliseconds. The officer obeyed. The ship did not. A violent blast tore through the far end of the upper corridor. The sound came down like a cathedral bell made of steel and rage. The glass floor shattered in sections. People fell backward into smoke and emergency foam. I saw the ambassador's shield flare, catching fragments, light bending around her in a perfect sphere. For one breath, she looked untouchable. Then the entire corridor support beam broke loose. It dropped 6 feet. The floor caved. The ambassador fell. Her nano-silk arms fired into the walls, anchoring in 6 directions, holding her suspended in a storm of debris and red light. Elegant. Impressive. Still not enough. The lower incline hatch between us exploded inward under pressure from the collapsing level above. I ducked behind a pipe rack as hot air punched through the passage. The blast rolled over me with a roar, driving dust through every seam in my suit. My lungs seized around the taste of burned insulation and ionized metal. When I looked up, she was no longer above me. She was on my deck. 20 feet away. One knee against the grating, royal mantle torn by heat scoring, 6 nano-silk arms still glowing but uneven now, jittering with feedback. Around her, pieces of the command annex slammed down like falling monuments. She rose too smoothly for someone who had almost been crushed. Pride did that. Pride kept the back straight even when the ceiling was coming down. I staggered toward the nearest pressure door. It was already closing. A heavy grey bulkhead, 12 inches thick, descending between the lower passage and the only surviving evacuation throat. I moved on instinct. Threw myself at it. Both hands under the edge. My shoulders screamed. The door did not care. It kept dropping, slow and unstoppable, hydraulic teeth grinding on damaged rails. Help me! I shouted. The ambassador crossed the space in a blur. One of her nano-silk arms struck my chest and hurled me backward like I weighed nothing. I hit the floor and slid, gasping. She flowed past me toward the door, eyes burning with cold disgust. Move aside, ignorant welder, the translator snapped through static. Your crude biological effort is wasting the remaining oxygen. Her 6 arms spread against the descending bulkhead. For a second, the door stopped. White light surged through her limbs. The pressure motors whined. Her arms trembled. The bulkhead resumed falling. 1 inch. 2. 3. Her expression sharpened. The shield around her flickered again. The overhead lights died to emergency red. The bulkhead slammed shut. Boom. Silence punched the compartment. Not real silence. The kind after a door seals you away from everyone who might have heard you scream. I lay on the floor, breathing hard, staring at the closed hatch. She stood in front of it, 6 glowing arms pressed against useless metal, her perfect posture trapped inside a dead-end tunnel beneath a dying ship. Outside, another impact rolled through the hull. Inside, the temperature climbed. The air tasted thinner. And for the first time since I had seen her, the Larsat ambassador did not look above me. She looked at me. The first thing that fell was not the ceiling. It was the sound. 1 second, the sealed compartment was full of alarms, pressure warnings, and the distant thunder of the fleet being torn apart. The next second, a blast rolled down from the auxiliary reactor decks and crushed every noise into one monstrous boom. My good ear went white. My bad ear stayed dead. The floor kicked upward under me. I slammed against the sealed bulkhead shoulder first, felt the impact rattle through old acid scars and patched armor, then dropped hard onto the grating as the entire underground compartment twisted around us. Above, something massive broke loose. Not a panel. Not a pipe. A whole section of armored support spine sheared away with a sound like a mountain splitting in the dark. The ambassador turned toward the ceiling, 6 nano-silk arms rising in a bright defensive crown. Her translator crackled. Structural instability detected. Royal Rescue Lattice engaging. Nothing engaged. The light strobed red. Then black. Then red again. The ceiling 30 feet overhead folded inward. I rolled before I thought. Training was too clean a word for it. This was lower deck survival instinct, the ugly kind, the kind beaten into your muscles by years of pressure leaks, falling braces, failing seals, and supervisors who shouted after the accident instead of before. I grabbed my tool crate strap, kicked off the grating, and threw myself behind a reinforced pipe manifold just as the first slab came down. The impact hit the floor like a freight train. Metal screamed. Hot dust blasted through the compartment. The shock wave slammed into my respirator and drove stale air back down my throat. I coughed once. Kept moving. The ambassador was still standing in the open. Of course she was. Royal posture. Royal confidence. Royal faith in systems that had already stopped breathing. Her 6 liquid arms flashed outward, weaving a lattice of cobalt and violet light over her head. For one beautiful second, it looked like a cathedral made of living wire. Then the next support slab hit it. The lattice bent. Her arm spasmed. A dangerous pop cracked through the air as the impact forced feedback through her shield. She staggered. Only 1 step. But I saw it. So did she. The compartment shrank around us. The collapse sealed the evacuation throat behind 3,000 pounds of broken plating. A secondary beam dropped across the upper hatch, hammering the doorway flat with a brutal clang. The path we had come through was gone. The way out was gone. The ship had taken a deep breath. And buried us in its chest. I pushed myself up, boots slipping on hot condensation. The air temperature was climbing fast. The gauge over the service wall flickered between 140 and 150 degrees Fahrenheit, then died in a shower of sparks. Hydrogen vent line. That was my first thought. Not the ambassador. Not the dead hatch. Not the fact that we were trapped under a collapsing warship during a parasite machine assault. Hydrogen vent line. Because I heard it. A thin, wet hiss behind the left wall. Steady. Angry. Rising. I turned my good ear toward it and held my breath. The hiss pulsed every 4 seconds. That meant the pressure regulator was still cycling. Badly. If the regulator jammed closed, the compartment would become an oven with teeth. I crawled toward the manual release cluster bolted beneath the service console. The floor burned through my gloves. Not enough to stop me. Enough to remind me I was still alive. Behind me, the ambassador spoke with cold disgust, though her voice carried a new fracture under the smooth translation. "What are you doing?" I did not answer. I slammed my shoulder into the fallen tool crate, shoved broken clamps aside, and searched for the valve key. No key. Of course. The fleet could afford royal crystal corridors but not a full lower deck emergency kit. I found an old pry bar, a cracked torque gauge, 2 seal rings, and my rusted nut wrench. Good enough. Above us, the ship groaned again. The ambassador raised her arms toward the ceiling, sending streams of nano-silk light into the smoke. Fleet Central Command, she said. Open rescue channel. Ambassadorial priority. Larsat diplomatic body requires immediate extraction. Static answered her. Then a low, dead tone. Her eyes narrowed. She tried again, sharper. Override. Royal encryption. 6-arm command lattice active. Her nano-silk arms moved faster now, slicing symbols through the hot air, each gesture precise enough to make human motion look drunk. The console beside her flickered. A red error symbol appeared. Then another. Then the whole panel went dark. I shoved the wrench around the release collar and leaned hard. Nothing moved. The valve was frozen in place. Baked by heat and years of neglect. Come on, I growled. I reset my grip. Left hand high. Right hand low. Elbow locked. Back braced. My muscles remembered angles my brain didn't have oxygen to name. The ambassador turned toward me, her glow reflecting in the sweat and soot across my visor. The automated fleet system will correct pressure divergence within milliseconds, she said. Your manual interference is meaningless. A tremor ran through the floor. The hiss became a scream. The wall panel beside me bulged outward half an inch. I looked at her. Then at the dead console. Then back at the wrench. Milliseconds are taking their time. I drove my boot against the base plate and pulled. The wrench slipped. My knuckles smashed against hot metal, and white-hot agony flashed up my arm. I sucked air through my teeth. Too hot. Too thin. The compartment pressure was climbing. The ambassador's 6 arms recoiled slightly from the grime on the ceiling, then extended again, trying to interface with a relay that was no longer alive. I saw her confidence fighting reality. It was almost cruel to watch. She was built for control. For grids. For perfect feedback. For command structures that answered when royal light touched them. Down here, the ship answered only to force, heat, pressure, and leverage. My world. Not hers. The ceiling gave another violent crack. A narrow pipe snapped overhead, spraying coolant mist that flashed into steam before it hit the floor. The steam rolled across the compartment in a low white wave. The ambassador stepped back from it, shield flaring. The flare guttered. For the first time, her face changed. Not fear. Not yet. Calculation failing. That was worse. I wrapped both hands around the wrench and hauled again. The valve shrieked. A tiny shift. Maybe a 1/4 inch. Enough to make the pipe behind the wall cough. Not enough to save us. A new alarm blinked on the sealed bulkhead. Pressure accumulation critical. Manual exhaust recommended. The ambassador stared at it as if the words had insulted her bloodline. Then she looked down at me. I was on one knee, shoulders shaking, respirator rattling against my face, pulling on a tool old enough to belong in a museum. She said, "This is primitive." Yeah. I forced the wrench back into position. The metal collar glowed dull orange under the emergency light. My glove smoked at the fingertips. I lowered my head and set my weight behind the tool. But primitive still works when pretty dies. The ship answered with a deep structural moan. A section of wall plating tore loose behind her and slammed down between us, close enough to scatter sparks across her mantle. She did not fall. But her arms flickered. All 6 of them. The glow that had once looked like divine mathematics now jittered with interference, each strand vibrating against the corrupted air. I heard another sound under the hiss. A rolling clatter. Something huge shifting above the compartment. The auxiliary reactor deck was settling. If it dropped another foot, it would crush the main exhaust routing and lock every manual release from this side. I had seconds. Maybe less. I drove the wrench down, wedged the pry bar through its handle, and turned the whole setup into a crude lever. The ambassador's voice cut through the heat. You will rupture the collar. Better than waiting for a dead computer to pray. I leaned in. Every scar across my chest pulled tight. My lungs dragged at the thinning air. The pry bar bent. The wrench groaned. The valve screamed back. Then the ship shook so hard the ambassador lost balance and caught herself with two human hands against the wall, her nano-silk arms whipping out too late. Too late. I saw her realize it. Her royal limbs had reacted slower than my battered body. Only by a blink. But survival lives in blinks. The valve shifted another inch. A brutal blast of trapped pressure punched through the emergency bypass. The compartment roared. Hot vapor surged into the overhead duct, dragging smoke and poison upward in a screaming spiral. For 3 heartbeats, I thought I had it. Then the bypass slammed shut again. The release collar jammed halfway open. A grinding vibration rolled through the wall. The main hatch behind us flashed red. Permanent lockdown initiated. The ambassador stood very still in the storm of steam, light trembling along her 6 arms. I wiped soot off my visor with the back of my glove and stared at the sealed room, the buried exits, the dead console, the half-open valve, and the pressure gauge climbing again. We were not saved. Not even close. We were just sealed deeper inside the ship's dying machinery. And now the machinery knew we were there. The bypass died with a sound like a throat closing. 1 second, hot vapor was tearing upward through the overhead duct, dragging smoke with it in a screaming spiral. The next second. Clang. The release collar locked halfway open, and the whole compartment dropped into a suffocating red silence. I stayed on one knee with both hands still wrapped around the wrench, chest heaving, visor fogged, shoulders trembling from the effort. The tool was vibrating. Not from my grip. From the ship. Deep inside the walls, the dying machinery had begun to hum in a new rhythm. Low. Uneven. Wrong. The Larsat ambassador stood 12 feet away, her 6 nano-silk arms hovering in the smoke like wounded lightning. Their light should have filled the chamber with royal precision, but now it flickered in weak cobalt pulses, blinking against the dark like a signal no one was answering. She lifted one hand toward the dead console. System, she said, voice sharp through the damaged translator. Restore ambassadorial channel. Connect to fleet mother grid. Confirm living command presence. Static whispered back. Then a single red line crawled across the console. No grid response. The words reflected in her eyes. For the first time, she did not speak immediately. The compartment answered for her. A pressure seam behind the wall gave 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 Like something enormous outside the room was counting down. I pushed myself to my feet and staggered toward the service panel. Every breath dragged heat through my mask. The air tasted metallic, sour, and thin, full of burned insulation and ionized dust. The temperature indicator above the panel flickered back to life. 158 degrees Fahrenheit. Then 162. Then the display glitched and went black. Your system's dead, I said. My voice came out lower than I meant it to. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just tired. She turned toward me, and the glow beneath her elegant mantle rippled once, like her body itself rejected the sentence. Impossible. The word was almost too soft for the translator. I jammed the rusted wrench into my belt loop and grabbed the edge of the manual panel. The cover was warped from the thermal surge. I pulled once. Nothing. I pulled again, harder. The metal shrieked. My burned glove slipped. I reset my stance, planted one boot against the wall, and tore the cover loose with a harsh metallic crack. It hit the floor and bounced twice. Inside, the emergency linkage was a mess of old levers, pressure rods, and mechanical locks nobody in the upper decks remembered existed. Good. Old things had one virtue. They did not need permission to move. The ambassador's 6 arms swept past me, each glowing strand trying to scan the exposed mechanism. Tiny violet symbols formed and collapsed around the gears. Error. 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 Her arms recoiled as if the machine had insulted her. This interface has no quantum handshake, she said. No, I grabbed the nearest lever and tested its resistance. The whole assembly groaned under my hand. It has rust. A small emergency terminal near her shoulder rebooted with a low, somber hum. Both of us looked at it. The screen flickered, filled with static, then stabilized into a cold white diagnostic feed. Fleet Auxiliary Reactor 2, unresponsive. Defense Outer Ring, compromised. Upper Command Spine, severed. Rescue Automation, unavailable. The words scrolled down too calmly. Too cleanly. Like a funeral written by a machine. The ambassador stepped closer. Her posture was still tall, still regal, still trying to command the air around her. But her breathing had changed. Shorter. Measured too carefully. A ruler trying not to gasp. Then the terminal opened a live damage map. The ship appeared as a thin blue outline suspended in darkness. One by one, entire sections of the fleet blinked red. Lower decks. Midline lifts. Diplomatic corridors. Command annex. The path behind us was not just blocked. It was gone. A grey dead zone spread around our compartment like ice across glass. Her eyes traced it. The silence. Afterward felt colder than vacuum. Not because the heat had dropped. It had not. The air still burned at the edges of every breath. But something in her had gone still. I knew that kind of stillness. I had seen it in workers who heard the hatch lock behind them. In welders who watched a pressure gauge climb past the final number. In men who realized the rescue team was on the other side of a wall that would not open. The terminal chimed once. A soft, polished sound from a universe that still believed in procedures. Then it displayed the source of the cascade failure. External assault pattern confirmed. Parasitic mechanical swarm. Generation class, newborn hunger engine. Breach method, acoustic resonance through armor seams. The ambassador's face changed again. This time, I saw recognition. Not fear. History. Her 6 nano-silk arms froze midair. The terminal continued. Royal Diplomatic Security Architecture unable to adapt to non-networked physical penetration. Automated countermeasures require intact mother grid. Mother grid unavailable. Manual intervention required. Those last 3 words hung between us. Manual intervention required. I almost laughed. There was no humor in it. Just a dry sound caught behind my respirator, too bitter to escape. The LARSAT ambassador stared at the terminal as if reality had placed a dirty tool in her perfect hands. Manual, she whispered. The translator made the word sound like a confession. A pipe above us rattled. Condensation dripped from a torn insulation sleeve, hitting cold titanium somewhere in the smoke. Tap. 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 A shaky rhythm under the dying hum. I looked at her 6 floating arms. Perfect engineering. Fluid motion. Royal mathematics. Each one still bright, still beautiful, still helpless without a living grid to tell it where the universe ended and the machine began. Then I looked at my own hands. Scorched gloves. Cracked knuckles under the fabric. Old acid burns aching beneath the suit. A body built out of labor, damage, stubborn breath, and low deck timing. She saw me looking. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The old order was still in the room. Her above. Me below. Her light. My grime. Her empire. My wrench. But the ship did not care about rank. The ship cared about pressure, heat, airflow, load-bearing structure. The ugly truth of things that either held or failed. She lifted her chin, trying to reclaim the shape of command. Human, she said. Explain this chamber's mechanical emergency hierarchy. I stared at her. The words were almost reasonable. Almost. Then a deeper boom rolled through the hull, and the floor dipped 2 inches beneath us. The overhead beams shrieked. The terminal flashed another warning. EMP saturation rising. Automated circuits at risk of total freeze. Her arms twitched at the phrase. I felt the hair along my neck rise under the helmet padding. EMP saturation. That meant the blast from the auxiliary reactor wasn't finished bleeding through the ship. It was crawling toward us through conduits, relays, armor ribs, and every smart material the upper decks had ever trusted. I took 1 step back from the panel. Get away from the walls. She looked at me as if I had barked at a queen. I do not take spatial orders from. The sentence died. A blue-white spark jumped from the console to one of her nano-silk arms. The sound was small. A dangerous pop. Her whole body snapped rigid. All 6 arms flared at once, then dimmed. The translator glitched into static. Her eyes widened. Not with pain yet. With disbelief. The chamber lights flickered. The hum under the floor deepened. I smelled ozone. Hot copper. Dying circuits. The royal devices along her mantle lit up red, one after another, like tiny emergency stars burning out across her body. She whispered something in her own language. No translation came. The system had finally stopped speaking for her. The EMP field crawled closer, invisible and hungry. I could feel it in the fillings of my teeth, in the tremble of the wrench against my hip, in the way the dead panels around us began to spark without warning. The ambassador looked from the failing terminal to her flickering arms. Then to me. No insult came this time. No lecture about carbon. No polished disgust. Only the raw, silent realization that all her beautiful systems had led her into a locked room with heat rising, oxygen thinning, and a manual valve half open in the wall. And the only thing still functioning was the obsolete man she had refused to see. The first EMP wave did not look like lightning. It looked like the air forgetting how to be air. The space between the walls bent blue-white for half a breath, every loose bolt, dead wire, and cracked panel humming at once as if the whole compartment had been turned into a tuning fork. My teeth buzzed. My wrench kicked against my hip. The ambassador's 6 nano-silk arms flared brighter than the emergency lamps. Then every light in the room went out. For 1 full second, there was only darkness and the sound of both of us breathing. Mine came rough through a damaged respirator. Hers came too quiet. Too controlled. Too royal. Then the compartment exploded back into red strobe light. The EMP field rolled across the service wall with a high-pitched whine, crawling through burned circuitry and dead consoles, jumping from panel to panel in violent little pops. The ambassador stood frozen near the terminal. Her 6 glowing arms hovered around her like a crown of living code, but the movement was wrong now. Jittering. Lagging. Each strand trembled half a beat behind her body, as if the command inside her had to fight its way through static. Move, I snapped. She did not. Her eyes were locked on the failing instruments across her mantle, every royal device blinking red in sequence. I lunged toward her as another surge screamed through the wall. A strip of conduit above her head spat cobalt sparks. She finally turned, and for 1 moment her expression was pure offense, as if danger had violated protocol by touching her without consent. Do not place your contaminated, the second wave hit. It slammed into the compartment with a flat, invisible force. No flame. No blast. Just a pulse so hard it made every dead machine try to wake up and die again. The console behind her burst into sparks. Her 6 nano-silk arms convulsed inward. The sound that came from them was not a scream. It was worse. A thin synthetic shriek, like liquid glass being pulled through a magnetic storm. She dropped to one knee. The translator at her throat spat half a syllable, then died. For the first time since I had seen her, the Larsat ambassador made a sound in her own voice. No translation. No royal filter. Just a sharp, broken gasp. I grabbed her by the upper arm and dragged her back from the console as a line of overcharged current snapped across the floor where she had been standing. She was lighter than I expected. Not weak. Just built differently. All elegance, strange balance, radiant structure, wrapped in diplomatic armor that had probably cost more than every tool in the lower decks combined. But in my grip, with her systems fried and the air burning around us. She was weight. She was panic. She was someone who could fall. The realization hit me harder than the pulse. I pulled her behind the pipe manifold and shoved her down as the terminal blew apart above us. Shards of black casing clattered against the grating. The room filled with the stink of ozone and cooked insulation. A new alarm started somewhere behind the sealed wall. Not electronic. Mechanical. An old pressure bell. Bong. 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 That meant the primary monitors were gone and the ancient backups had taken over. The ship was losing its mind layer by layer, dropping from quantum command to analog panic. I understood analog panic. I wiped fog from my visor and crawled toward the manual panel. The ambassador tried to rise. One of her nano-silk arms reached for the wall to support her, but it spasmed halfway there, split into flickering threads, and collapsed back into a dim ribbon of light. She stared at it. The red strobe carved her face into fragments. Pride. Shock. Disbelief. Then something smaller underneath. Fear, maybe. The kind that has no language until it reaches the lungs. A distant thump rolled through the hull. Then another. Internal explosions, maybe one deck up, maybe 5. In a ship this damaged, distance became a liar. The floor tilted beneath us by a few degrees, enough to send loose tools sliding across the grating in a slow metallic scrape. My rusted clamps clinked against her boot. She looked down at them like she had landed in another species' graveyard. "Stay low," I said. She did not understand the words anymore. Translator was dead. So I pointed down. Hard. Then pointed at the ceiling, where the conduit network was glowing a dangerous dull orange. She followed my gesture. A pressure line overhead swelled with a wet hiss. Her eyes widened. Good. Fear made fast students. I jammed my wrench into the half-open release collar again and pulled. The valve refused. The first override had bought us seconds. Maybe a minute. Now the bypass had jammed, the EMP was crawling through every smart circuit, and the temperature was rising so fast my suit's inner lining felt like it had been soaked in hot sand. My respirator clicked. Filter stress warning. I ignored it. The ambassador touched her dead translator, then looked at me with a silent fury that wanted to become a command and had nowhere to go. I could almost hear what she wanted to say. Fix this. Explain this. Obey. Instead, I shoved my old pry bar into her hands. She stared at it. A blunt, rust-scarred piece of steel. Primitive. Heavy. Ugly. Useful. I placed the tip under the warped edge of the pressure casing and tapped the leverage point twice. Then I pointed at her. Push. She looked from the pry bar to me. Her 6 ruined ribbons of light trembled behind her shoulders, flickering like injured stars. For one breath, I thought she would refuse. Then another EMP ripple crawled through the wall with a rising whine. The air snap blew. Her arms recoiled in spasms of light. That did it. She drove the pry bar down. Too clean. Too precise. No body weight behind it. The casing didn't move. I shook my head, crawled beside her, and slammed my shoulder into the bar with everything I had left. The metal screamed. The casing shifted a quarter inch. Hot vapor whispered from the seam. She watched me lean into it, watched my boots grind against the tilted floor, watched my damaged frame turn pain into leverage. Her face changed again. Not admiration. Not yet. Recognition. This was a language she had never respected. Pressure. Weight. Grip. Timing. The ship groaned above us. A bulkhead somewhere tore with a long, ominous shriek. Smoke thickened near the ceiling and rolled down in layers. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the secondary maintenance crawlway half hidden beneath a collapsed cable tray. She resisted for 1 second. Royal instinct. Wrong direction. Away from clean exits. Toward the guts. I yanked harder and pointed to the sealed evacuation door. Dead. Then to the crawlway. Alive. Maybe. She looked at the dark opening. It was barely 3 feet high, lined with old pipe brackets and manual service rails. No polished floor. No clearance. No royal architecture. Just a narrow industrial throat leading deeper into the ship's pressure system. A place built for people like me. A place that would never have admitted her unless disaster dragged her down to its level. Behind us, the conduit finally split. A violent jet of heated vapor blasted across the compartment, cutting through the space where we had been standing moments earlier. The roar swallowed everything. I pulled her into the crawlway. She stumbled, caught herself with one shaking hand, and followed. Not because she trusted me. Because everything else she trusted was dead. The crawl space swallowed the red light behind us. Ahead, only darkness waited, breathing through pipes. I moved first, wrench in one hand, shoulder scraping hot metal, lungs fighting every breath. Behind me, the fallen ambassador crawled after the obsolete carbon man, while the ship screamed itself apart above us. The crawlway was not a tunnel. It was a coffin with pipes. 3 feet high, maybe 20 inches across at the narrowest point, lined with blistered insulation, sweating pressure lines, and old manual rails that scraped my shoulders every time the ship lurched. I crawled first. Wrench in my right hand. Left palm sliding over hot metal. The ambassador dragged herself behind me, her breathing no longer royal, no longer measured, no longer filtered through dead translation systems. Just air going in too fast. And coming out afraid. A bulkhead slammed shut somewhere behind us. The sound traveled through the crawl space like thunder inside a steel lung. Boom. Then another. Boom. Then another, closer. Boom. The ship was sealing itself in sections, amputating its own damaged compartments to keep the upper command decks alive. Lower deck logic. Ugly logic. Sacrifice the places nobody wants to visit. Save the places with windows. I kept crawling. The heat thickened around my helmet until every breath felt dragged through a furnace vent. My respirator clicked again, sharper this time, warning me the filter was taking in too much ionized dust, too much overheated coolant vapor, too much dying machinery. I slapped the side of the mask. It stopped clicking. That did not mean it was fixed. It meant it had given up complaining. Behind me, the ambassador made a sharp sound. I twisted as far as the crawl space allowed. One of her nano-silk arms had brushed an exposed conduit bracket. The contact triggered a violent blue snap. Her whole body jerked back, and all 6 luminous strands recoiled into twitching loops around her shoulders. Not graceful. Not commanding. Not even controlled. The royal mathematics were turning into frightened light. She stared at the arm that had sparked, her face lit by its unstable glow. There was no translator to soften the sound she made. No machine to turn pain into dignity. Only a breathless la-sat word that broke against the pipe walls and came back small. I pointed forward. She shook her head once. Not refusal. Disorientation. Her eyes were tracking invisible readouts that no longer existed, searching for a grid that had abandoned her, waiting for high-tech certainty to return and tell her where to place her hands. It never came. So I reached back, grabbed her wrist, and pulled. She followed. The crawlway dropped suddenly. My stomach lurched as the floor beneath us sloped into a service bend. Loose screws and black dust slid past my gloves and vanished into darkness ahead. The ship groaned. A long, deep, exhausted sound. Then the wall plates on our left cracked with a sharp metallic pop. I froze. The ambassador bumped into my boots. Neither of us breathed. A wet hiss seeped through the crack. Oxygen line. Failing. Not fully open yet. But leaking fast. I pressed my good ear against the wall. The sound came through clean. HSSSSSS. Then a pulse. HSSSSSS. Then a tremor. The pump behind it was dying. Bad, I whispered. She didn't understand the word. But she understood my face. The crawl space. Lights flickered once, then the narrow strip of amber emergency lamps ahead went dark one segment at a time. Click. 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 Until the only light came from her damaged arms and the dull red glow of heat building behind the walls. We crawled through alien twilight and human ruin. A distant internal explosion thumped somewhere above us. The entire crawlway jumped. My helmet slammed into a pipe bracket, sending white sparks across my vision. I bit down on a curse and kept my left hand flat against the floor, feeling vibration, feeling direction, feeling the ship's damaged rhythm through the pads of my gloves. 30 feet ahead, the secondary maintenance fork should have opened into a pump access chamber. From there, we could reach the manual exhaust stack. If it was still there. If the bulkheads had not dropped. If the parasite swarm had not carved through the hull above it. If the ship had not already decided we were expendable. Too many IFS. I hated IFS. I trusted bolts. Valves. Weight. Sound. The ambassador's arm brushed my shoulder. I looked back. She was trying to speak. Her lips formed hard, elegant syllables, but the dead translator at her throat only spat a thin electric crackle. She pressed 2 shaking fingers against the device. Nothing. Then she touched one of her nano-silk arms. It tried to rise for her. It failed halfway. The strand split into 3 dim threads, jittered, and curled inward like a burnt-out signal. Her eyes widened again. This time, the panic stayed. The final layer came off her right there in that narrow service throat. No delegation. No glass corridor. No fleet mother grid. No royal shell. Just her, crawling on scorched metal behind the man she had called obsolete, pinned under the same burning pressure, breathing the same poisoned air, listening to the same ship countdown around us. A deafening slam shook the crawlway. Ahead. Close. I swore and crawled faster. The fork was sealing. I heard the old mechanism grinding before I saw it. Metal on metal. A bulkhead door dropping across the access chamber entrance. Not smooth. Damaged. Heavy. Slow enough to race. Move. I barked. I didn't know if she understood, but my body did not. Wait for language. I lunged forward on elbows and knees, dragging the wrench under me, shoulder grinding against the wall, boots kicking against the floor. The opening appeared ahead as a rectangle of red light. The bulkhead was already halfway down. 40 inches. 30. The ambassador scrambled behind me, her hands slipping on condensation, her dead arms flickering wildly as she fought to keep them from touching the overcharged walls. 20 inches. I threw the wrench through the gap first. It clanged onto the other side. Then I flattened myself and shoved forward. My chest plate scraped the bottom edge of the door. The heat from the metal burned through the suit padding. White-hot agony flashed along my ribs. I exhaled everything, made myself smaller, and pulled through. The bulkhead dropped lower. The ambassador reached the gap. Too late. Her eyes met mine across the closing steel. For one awful breath, I saw the old command return to her face. Not arrogance. A command to herself. Do not beg. Do not break. Do not become less than royal. Then the ceiling behind her cracked. A pressure pipe burst with a violent hiss, blasting steam down the crawlway. Her discipline vanished. She thrust one hand through the gap. I grabbed it. The door kept falling. My boot slammed against the access chamber floor. I wrapped both hands around her wrist and pulled with everything left in my damaged carbon frame. She slid forward inches at a time, mantle snagging, shoulders twisting, 6 ruined nano-silk arms flaring in panic behind her. The bulkhead edge brushed her backplating and screamed as it scraped across alien alloy. She gasped. I roared and pulled harder. The door dropped another inch. My shoulders screamed. My spine lit up with pressure. The access chamber around me blurred red and black. Then she came through. We hit the floor together just as the bulkhead slammed shut behind her. Boom! The sound swallowed the room. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. She lay half against me, shaking, her 6 arms dim and trembling like broken neon under deep water. I stared at the sealed hatch. No way back. The crawlway was gone. The evacuation passage was gone. The command corridor was gone. Every secondary route was locking shut around us, one by one, like the ship was burying us alive in layers of steel. The access chamber was larger than the crawl space, but not by much. Maybe 12 feet across. Round walls. For dead consoles. One manual pump column in the center. And above it, a cracked oxygen regulator coughing weakly through a filter packed with glittering gray dust. Silicon contamination. The pump inhaled with a wet mechanical gasp. Failed. Tried again. Failed. The ambassador pushed herself upright, staring at the regulator. Her remaining devices blinked red across her mantle. Critical failure. Critical failure. Critical failure. Even without translation, I knew what those symbols meant. She knew I knew. Our eyes met in the dim cobalt tremor of her dying arms. The chamber groaned. The temperature climbed. The oxygen pump gave one last desperate gasp. And stopped. The oxygen pump stopped like a heart deciding it was done. No final alarm. No warning voice. Just one wet mechanical gasp from the regulator above us. Then silence. The access chamber became smaller the instant the sound died. I could feel it in my lungs before the gauges confirmed it. The air lost pressure. Heat pressed closer. Every breath dragged in less than the last, like the room was stealing the middle out of each inhale. The ambassador stared at the dead pump. Her 6 nano-silk arms hovered around her in dim, trembling loops, each one flickering with unstable cobalt light. Then the grey dust inside the cracked filter began to move. Slow at first. A glittering shimmer behind the regulator grill. Silicon contamination. The stuff had come from cooked circuit boards, melted shield foam, shattered smart panels, and every over-engineered royal device that had failed under thermal overload. It drifted down in tiny sparkling threads. Beautiful. Deadly. The ambassador saw it and went still. Not proud still. Not royal still. Prey still. She backed away from the pump, one careful inch at a time, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber was 12 feet across with locked bulkheads on every side, a fallen service beam blocking the upper maintenance slot, and the crawlway sealed behind a 12-inch pressure door that would not open again without power. We were inside a metal lung with no breath left in it. I pushed myself to one knee. My head swam. Black dots drifted across the edge of my visor, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Too fast. Too heavy. My body knew oxygen starvation before my brain found the words. The ambassador made a sound behind me. A sharp inhale. Then a broken exhale. I turned. The silicon dust had reached her. It clung to the glow around her arms, turning each strand dull and grainy. Her liquid nano-silk tried to shift, tried to defend, tried to form some delicate royal barrier, but the particles sank into the light and made it stutter. One arm collapsed first. It lost shape in midair, falling into a dim loop against her shoulder. The second followed, shivering like a dying signal. She looked at them with an expression I had never seen on a ruler's face. Not pain. Violation. Her identity was being switched off piece by the dirty air of a lower deck utility room. She raised her hands to command them. Nothing answered. A low hiss seeped from the regulator. Not oxygen. Hot backflow from a ruptured coolant line. The temperature climbed again. My suit display flashed faint amber through the cracked visor. 171 degrees Fahrenheit. 174. Then the screen blurred. I swallowed, but my mouth had gone dry. The heat wrapped around my chest, pressed into the old acid scars beneath the armor, and turned every breath into a slow burn. White-hot agony crawled up my spine and settled behind my eyes. Stay awake. That was the only order that mattered. Not survive. Not escape. Just stay awake long enough to find the next thing to hit, turn, break, open, or hold. The ambassador tried to stand. Her knees failed. She caught herself on the pump column, but another spark snapped from the dead regulator and jumped into the dim remnants of her nano-silk arms. Her whole frame locked. Then she fell hard against the grated floor. The sound was small. Too small. After all that light, all that power, all that clean cruelty from the glass corridor above, she made almost no sound when she hit the lower deck. That was the part that twisted something inside me. Not pity. Not yet. Recognition. The ship did not care what species you were when the air ran out. I crawled toward her. My gloves dragged through hot dust. Every movement took too much effort. My arms felt filled with lead. My ribs pulled tight under the pressure shift. She looked up at me. Her eyes still carried that prismatic alien glow, but the edges were dimming, clouded by panic and chemical shock. She tried to speak. No translator. No imperial channel. No perfect voice delivered through ship speakers. Just a rasp of her own language, cracked by thin air. I didn't know the words. I knew the meaning. Help. Or maybe. Enough. The wall above us gave a sharp crack. A support plate shifted inward with a heavy thud, bending the upper frame of the chamber by 2 inches. Dust rained from the seam in shimmering grey curtains. The ambassador flinched. That flinch shattered the last of her dignity more completely than the EMP ever had. Her 6 arms, the pride of her royal biology, curled close around her back as weak strands of unstable light. They no longer looked like command lattices. They looked like something trying not to vanish. I reached her side and grabbed her shoulder. She recoiled at first. Old instinct. Royal disgust. Then another ragged gasp tore through her, empty and panicked, and she clutched at my sleeve with trembling fingers. Not graceful. Not superior. Just alive and terrified. I pulled her away from the regulator, dragging her toward the lowest corner of the chamber where the air would last a few seconds longer. A few seconds mattered. A few seconds could be a lifetime down here. The floor tilted again. Metal groaned overhead. The sealed crawlway door behind us boomed once from pressure distortion, like something massive had struck it from the other side. Boom. Then silence. The ambassador's eyes fixed on the door. She understood. No rescue. No return. No route. Only the pump column, the poisoned filter, the jammed mechanical stack, and my rusted wrench lying 10 feet away under a dead console. She dragged in a thin, shaking breath. Her voice came out raw, stripped of translation and title, but one word in Fleet Standard survived. End. I stared at her. She touched her failing arms with a shaking hand, then touched the blackened floor, then lowered her head as if accepting some ancient royal ritual. End, she whispered again. Let it end. That was what she meant. Let her die clean. Let the chamber take her before the silicon dust finished humiliating every perfect thing she had been taught to worship. Something hard and ugly rose in me. Maybe anger. Maybe survival. Maybe just the lower deck hatred of watching anybody surrender to a machine that had not earned the right. I leaned close enough for her to see my eyes through the cracked visor. No, she blinked. I pointed at the pump column. Then at the wrench. Then at myself. My hand shook. My lungs screamed. My heartbeat hammered so hard it felt like the chamber was beating with me. No gods down here, I rasped. No clean endings. A coolant line above us burst into a low boiling hiss. The chamber filled with steam and grey dust. The ambassador curled in on herself, choking on another desperate gasp, her once radiant arms flickering down to faint blue threads. I forced myself upright. The world tilted. My vision narrowed to the wrench. 10 feet. That was all. 10 feet across burning grating, through poisoned air, under a collapsing frame, with my nervous system lighting up like a damaged power grid. I took one staggering step. Then another. Behind me, the fallen ambassador made a broken sound that might have been my name. If she had ever bothered to learn it. I reached the wrench. My hand closed around rusted steel. The pump column waited in the center of the chamber, dead, heavy, manual, and mean. Exactly my kind of machine. I turned back toward her through the smoke. Her eyes were fading. The room was roaring now, though maybe that was only my pulse. I lifted the wrench. And I moved. The wrench felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the steel. Because the air was almost gone. I crossed 10 feet of burning grating like it was 10 miles through a furnace, each step dragging a desperate gasp out of my chest and giving me nothing back but heat, dust, and the bitter taste of electrical death. The pump column stood in the center of the chamber. Dead. Tall. Blackened. A brutal old machine bolted into the floor with 4 rusted anchor plates and a manual pressure wheel the size of my chest. Above it, the cracked regulator hung crooked from the ceiling, coughing out grey silicon dust in slow, glittering breaths. The ambassador lay near the corner where I had dragged her. Her 6 nano-silk arms were no longer arms. They were dim streams of cobalt thread trembling against her back, flickering on and off like damaged emergency lights under deep water. The last royal device on her mantle beeped. Once. Twice. Then the sound became erratic. Beep. Beep beep. Be dead. Her supreme technology went completely dark. The chamber heard it. I swear it did. The walls groaned lower, heavier, as if the ship had been waiting for that final surrender before tightening its grip around us. I slammed the wrench onto the pump's manual lock. Metal rang against metal. The sound tore through the room like a bell in a graveyard. The lock did not move. I hit it again. Clang. Again. Clang. My arms shook from oxygen starvation. My vision tunneled. The red emergency light smeared into long bloody-looking bands across the walls, but I blinked hard and forced the world back into shape. No. Not done. Not yet. Behind me, the ambassador dragged in a breath that sounded too thin to belong to a living thing. I turned. She was staring at me through the dust, eyes wide, luminous, terrified. Her lips moved around alien words that died before they became sound. Her fingers clawed weakly at the floor, trying to pull herself away from the contamination cloud. There was nowhere to go. That was the truth. 12 feet of metal. For dead consoles. 1 oxygen pump. 1 half-deaf human welder. 1 fallen royal alien choking on the failure of every perfect system she had ever believed in. The pump side panel flashed back to life for half a second. Emergency purge sequence armed. Then the screen glitched. The old mechanical speaker above us crackled with a dying voice. Technical chamber contamination exceeds survivable limit. Compartment sterilization in 180 seconds. My stomach dropped. The ambassador heard the tone even if she didn't understand the words. I saw it hit her. A countdown had a language of its own. The ship was going to burn the room clean to protect the upper decks. Not rescue us. Not assess us. Sterilize. The word sat inside my helmet like ice. 180 seconds. 3 minutes before this chamber became a sealed furnace. The ambassador's eyes went from the speaker to me. Her pride was gone now. Not hidden. Not wounded. Gone. Under the red strobe, under the falling dust, under the suffocating pressure, she looked less like a ruler and more like somebody who had finally understood that titles did not breathe for you. I stumbled toward her. The floor tilted hard beneath me, and I caught myself against the pump column. The metal was hot enough to burn through the glove lining. White-hot agony ran up my palm. I held on anyway. The ceiling screamed. A heavy structural groan rolled through the chamber, followed by a sharp crack from the right wall. One of the consoles broke loose and crashed to the floor, sparks spitting from its dead face. The oxygen regulator gave a violent hiss. Grey dust blasted downward. The ambassador curled in on herself, arms flickering wild and weak. I reached her and grabbed both her shoulders. She flinched from my touch, but only for an instant. Then she clung to my sleeves like I was the last solid object in the universe. I shook her once. Not cruel. Hard enough to drag her eyes back to mine. Look at me. She gasped. I pointed at my eyes. Then at hers. Look. At me. Maybe she understood the words. Maybe she understood the tone. Maybe rock bottom finally translated everything. Her eyes locked on mine. I could see my own cracked visor reflected in them, smeared with soot, lit red by the dying chamber. A primitive carbon thing. A low-deck repair animal. The obsolete mass she had dismissed from behind clean glass. And now, her only path through the next breath. I pointed to the pump column. Then to her chest. Then to mine. Her brows tightened, confused, afraid. I didn't have time to explain with language. So I grabbed one of her failing nano-silk strands. The moment my glove touched it, a cold electric shock tore through my arm and slammed straight into my nervous system. My teeth locked. My knees nearly buckled. The strand pulsed once, weak and bright, responding to organic contact instead of dead circuitry. There. I felt it. Not data. Not command. Current. A living pulse buried under the damage. I dragged her hand toward the manual pump intake, then slammed my own palm against the pressure wheel. She stared. I pressed her fingers to the remaining glow of her nano-silk, then pressed my fist against my own chest. You're light, I rasped. I hit the pump wheel. My muscle. I pointed to the regulator. Our air. Her breathing hitched. The idea horrified her. I saw it. A Larsat Royal using a human body as part of a manual survival circuit. Her remaining energy routed through crude leverage, rusted mechanics, damaged lungs, and a tool old enough to belong below every system she had ever considered civilized. A covenant made in grime. Not ceremony. Not consent written by empires. Just survival. The speaker crackled again. 120 seconds. The chamber answered with a violent rush of venting gas. Steam blasted from the ceiling and rolled over us in a white wave. The ambassador sagged, eyes losing focus, her arms dimming to near black. I caught her before she hit the floor. No, I growled. I pulled her upright and braced her against the pump column. She could barely stand. Her fingers trembled against my suit. I wrapped one of her weak nano-silk strands around the pump's dead induction ring, then locked my hand over the pressure wheel. The moment the strand touched the ring, the whole column gave a low, uncertain hum. Not power. Possibility. The ambassador stared at the machine. Then at me. A tear of faint bioluminescent fluid slipped from the corner of her eye and vanished into the dust on her cheek. She shook her head once. Not refusal. Shame. Fear. A silent confession that she did not know how to survive without being superior. I leaned close. My forehead nearly touched hers through the cracked visor. Want to stay pure? I rasped. Then hold your breath. Her eyes widened. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Down here, there are no gods. The countdown speaker hissed. 90 seconds. I shoved her hand against the induction ring and forced her failing nano-silk to stay connected. She cried out in her own language, the sound raw and stripped bare by the dead chamber. I turned the wheel. It resisted like a locked planet. My shoulders ignited. My lungs screamed. The ambassador's remaining light surged through the pump in a broken cobalt pulse, while my body drove the old mechanism inch by inch through rust, heat, and pressure. The chamber roared. The regulator above us bucked. The silicon cloud swirled into a violent spiral. For one impossible second, the pump tried to breathe. Then the pressure wheel jammed again. I looked at her. She looked at me. No empire between us now. No rank. No glass. Only a raw covenant in a room 90 seconds from erasure. I set my boots, lowered my head, and pulled harder. The pressure wheel did not turn. It fought me. It sat in the center of the dying chamber like a rusted judgment, locked against decades of neglect, thermal overload, and every dead system the fleet had trusted more than hands like mine. I pulled until my vision shrank to a red tunnel. Nothing. The ambassador's failing nano-silk strand pulsed against the induction ring, weak cobalt light crawling over the pump column in broken veins. The machine answered with a low hum. Then choked. The speaker above us crackled through static. 75 seconds. The words hit the walls and came back thinner. 75 seconds before the chamber sterilized itself. 75 seconds before every breath, every scar, every title, every insult, every empire, and every low-deck curse became ash-colored silence behind a locked bulkhead. I snarled through my respirator and let go of the wheel. The ambassador sagged beside the pump column, fingers still pressed to the induction ring, her eyes glassy with oxygen starvation. She watched me stumble toward the nearest dead maintenance panel. Her lips moved. No translator. No sound strong enough to cross the roar. Maybe she was telling me not to leave her. Maybe she was praying to whatever gods royal spiders worshipped when there. Algorithms stopped answering. I didn't have time to care. I slammed my wrench into the panel seam. Clang. The first hit bounced back up my arms with white-hot agony. Clang. The second bent the cover. Clang. The third broke the old locking pins with a dry metallic snap. The panel dropped open, hanging from one warped hinge. Inside was a nest of dead boards, ceramic relays, pressure rods, an emergency mechanical linkage sealed behind clear insulation already fogged from heat. I shoved the wrench in and tore the insulation loose. A dangerous pop cracked across the chamber. Blue sparks spat against my gloves. My nerves lit up like a damaged power grid. I froze for half a heartbeat, teeth locked, every muscle trying to recoil from the current. Then I forced my hand deeper. Because recoil was for people with time. Behind me, the ambassador gave a weak cry. I didn't look back. If I looked at her trembling eyes too long, if I let myself see how completely she had fallen, how the high-tech creature who had once floated over me in clean light now depended on my burnt-out tools and stubborn breath, I might think. Thinking killed you down here. I found the manual bypass rod by touch. Cold steel. Grease. Old grit. Good. I hooked the wrench around it and pulled. The rod shifted half an inch, then jammed. The pump gave a cough. Not enough. The induction ring sparked around her nano-silk strand, making the cobalt light flare once through the smoke. She gasped. The sound cut through me. Not because it was loud. Because it was small. I twisted toward her and pointed hard at the ring. Hold it! She shook her head, barely conscious. I slammed my palm against my chest, then pointed at her again. Hold! Maybe the word meant nothing. But the command did. Her spine straightened by instinct, one last reflex of a ruler remembering how not to collapse. She pressed both hands against the induction ring and forced the failing strand tighter around the metal. The pump column hummed again. Lower this time. Deeper. The whole floor trembled under my boots. 60 seconds. The ceiling groaned above us, a heavy structural sound that rolled through the chamber like the ship was kneeling. A wall plate behind the pump cracked from corner to corner. Hot vapor hissed through the split, wet and furious. The temperature jumped hard enough that my visor fogged white at the edges. I drove the wrench against the bypass rod and pulled again. The rod screamed. Metal on metal grind filled the room. My shoulder seized. My chest compressed. Every old burn beneath my suit woke up at once, a chorus of heat and pressure and memory. Still, the rod moved. 1 inch. 2. The pump inhaled. A filthy, mechanical inhale. The regulator overhead rattled, then vomited a plume of grey contamination back into the chamber. Wrong direction. I coughed and nearly dropped. The ambassador's eyes widened in horror as the dust curled around her dim arms. Her nano-silk began to flicker faster, overloaded, drowning in poisoned air. She tried to pull away. I staggered to her, grabbed her wrist, and forced her hand back to the ring. No. She fought me for 1 second, weak but terrified. I got close enough that my cracked visor almost touched her face. You let go, we both end. Her breath shook. Our eyes locked. Whatever language was between us burned away in the heat. She understood. Her fingers closed around the induction ring again. Her last strand of royal light pulsed into the machine. I lunged back to the panel. The bypass rod had opened the wrong intake. I needed the purge gate. Old schematic memory snapped through my head. Training manuals nobody read. Lower deck chalk drawings on steel walls. Senior welders shouting over pump noise. If the intake reversed, don't fight the wheel. Break the governor lock. Force the exhaust teeth by hand. By hand. Of course. I dropped to the base of the column and shoved my wrench under the governor guard. The guard was bolted tight. I hit it. Once. Twice. The third strike sent a high-voltage spark bursting out from the casing. It popped against my forearm and drove nervous system pain straight through my shoulder. I saw nothing for a second but white. My body tried to fold. I spat air into the mask and stayed upright. 45 seconds. The ambassador made a ragged sound behind me. Not fear this time. Warning. I looked up. A ceiling brace was bending. Slowly. 10 feet of overheated structural alloy bowing toward the pump column. If it came down, it would crush the regulator, the induction ring, and our only chance of breathing. I shoved my back against the pump base, hooked the wrench under the governor guard, and used both legs to drive leverage through the tool. The wrench bent. The guard shrieked. My boots skidded over the grating. The brace above us cracked louder. The ambassador's dim arms suddenly lifted. All 6 of them. Ruined. Trembling. Barely holding shape. But they rose. She wrapped them around the bending brace, not to command it, not to interface with it, but to hold it back with what little remained of her own body's light. Her face twisted with effort. Her eyes never left mine. For the first time, she was not above the machine. She was inside the fight. I roared and pulled. The governor guard snapped open. The exhaust teeth exposed beneath it began grinding against their own lock, rusted and half-melted. I jammed the wrench between them. The tool screamed. The pump column bucked so hard it nearly threw me sideways. 30 seconds. I grabbed the pressure wheel again. The ambassador drove her remaining light into the ring. The pump answered. A deep mechanical growl rose beneath the floor. This time, when I pulled, the wheel moved. One brutal inch. Then another. The exhaust gate opened with a wet metallic gasp. Air rushed upward. Not clean. Not safe. But moving. Grey dust spiraled toward the regulator. Hot vapor tore through the upper vent. The chamber roared like a beast waking inside a steel cage. The countdown speaker glitched. Sterilization sequence interrupted. The ambassador's arm slipped from the brace. She collapsed against the pump column. I caught the wheel before it spun back and locked my whole body against it. The pressure was still fighting. The system was not saved. The disaster was not over. But for the first time, the dead machine was breathing because we made it breathe. Her failing eyes found mine through the smoke. No superiority remained there. Only terror. Trust. And the awful knowledge that her royal technology had been useless without my hands buried. Inside the broken heart of the ship, the pump did not keep breathing because it wanted to. It breathed because I held it open. Both hands locked around the pressure wheel, boots braced wide against the grated floor, shoulders hunched beneath the screaming regulator, I forced my whole body into the machine like a living brace. The wheel tried to spin back. The exhaust gate tried to close. The old pump column bucked beneath my grip with every pulse of trapped pressure, hammering through my arms, my chest, my jaw, my damaged ear. Grinding. Spitting. Fighting. The chamber roared around us. Hot vapor tore upward through the regulator in violent bursts, dragging grey silicon dust into the vent throat. The sound was wet and furious, like the ship was coughing through a pipe packed with sand. The ambassador clung to the induction ring beside me, her 6 ruined nano-silk strands wrapped weakly around the coil. Her light fed the pump in broken cobalt surges. My hands gave it motion. Her dying current. My leverage. That was the bargain. The pump accepted it. Then punished us for making it work. A radiation surge slammed backward through the induction ring. The column flashed cobalt white. The ambassador cried out and nearly fell away. I felt the surge hit my hands through the wheel, through the wrench wedged in the governor teeth, through every bolt in the pump assembly. White-hot agony tore up my arms. My nervous system overloaded in one brutal wave. For a second, I couldn't see the chamber. Only light. Only pressure. Only the impossible feeling of my own body becoming part of a machine that hated me. I did not let go. If I let go, the gate would close. If the gate closed, the silicon cloud would settle back into the room. If that happened, she would stop breathing first. Then me. Then the chamber would sterilize what was left of our mistakes. So I locked my grip harder. My gloves smoked at the seams. The wheel edge bit into my palms through the ruined insulation. I lowered my head and pulled against the back pressure with everything the lower decks had built into me. Every bad shift. Every ignored injury. Every supervisor screaming over alarms. Every night spent sleeping next to a toolbox because another line might rupture before breakfast. All of it went into that wheel. The ambassador's shoulder slammed into mine as the pump kicked. She was trying to hold me upright. I realized it slowly, through the haze of heat and static. Her hands had moved from the induction ring to my suit. One trembling arm across my back. One hand gripping the front plate of my harness. Her 6 dim strands still clung to the coil, but her real strength, what little remained of it, was bracing my weight. The Larsat ambassador? The royal creature who would not touch soot? Was holding a lower deck welder upright in a dead pump room. The thought should have made me laugh. I could not spare the air. The regulator above us shrieked. A slab of heated plating behind the pump split open with a sharp crack, and a ribbon of blue firelight burst through the seam. Not flame exactly. Exhaust plasma from a damaged fire control line. It licked across the wall, bright and hungry, throwing wild shadows over the chamber. The pressure wheel jerked half an inch backward. I roared and hauled it forward. The wrench wedged in the governor teeth screamed under the strain. Metal shavings rattled across the floor like hard rain. The ambassador flinched at the sound, but she did not release me. Her eyes were on my hands. I saw the horror there. Not disgust now. Or fear. Something deeper that hurt more to look at. She was watching my battered human frame become the missing component in a failed royal system. Watching crude muscle do what her command lattice could not. Watching the primitive carbon mass she had dismissed rewrite both our fates one grinding inch at a time. The pump surged again. This time the back pressure traveled through the floor. The whole chamber jumped. The manual wheel spun against my grip and dragged me forward. My shoulder hit the column with a dull thud. My knees almost gave out. The ambassador caught me. Her body was shaking so hard I felt it through my suit. She made a sound in her own language, urgent and broken. I did not know the words. But her hands pulled at my harness. Stop. That was what she meant. Stop before the machine takes you. With it. I turned my head just enough to see her through the cracked visor. The red emergency light flashed over her face. Her prismatic eyes were wet with bioluminescent shine, wide and desperate, no longer looking at a tool, a servant, or a contaminant. Looking at me. I shook my head. No, my voice barely came through the respirator. The pump screamed again. I dug my boots against the grating and leaned my entire weight onto the wheel. The governor teeth ground louder. The exhaust gate opened another notch. A violent rush of venting gas ripped through the overhead duct, and the room's pressure shifted so fast my ears popped. My bad ear gave nothing. My good one filled with roaring static. The ambassador staggered, but she kept one arm around me and one hand on the induction ring. Her remaining nano-silk strands flared. For a heartbeat, they looked almost beautiful again. Not perfect. Not royal. Alive. Cobalt light flowed from her broken biology into the pump, erratic and terrified, but real. The machine drank it. Then the back pressure answered with a deeper growl. The pump column began to overheat. Orange light glowed beneath the casing seams. Bolts trembled in their sockets. The pressure wheel turned slick beneath my damaged gloves, vibrating hard enough to blur. I wrapped one forearm through the wheel spokes and locked myself against it. The ambassador saw what I was doing. Her eyes widened. She shook her head violently. I ignored her. The wheel tried to snap back. My body stopped it. The impact drove the breath out of me. For one long second, there was no inhale after. Only pressure. Only darkness crawling in from the edges. Only the heavy grind of the pump and the frantic clutch of alien hands trying to keep me from falling. Then air came. Thin. Hot. Barely enough. I took it anyway. The chamber's sterilization speaker sputtered back to life. Sequence instability detected. Manual override active. Continue exhaust rotation. Continue. I stared at the wheel. At the impossible angle. At the glowing seams. At the vent throat still clogged with grey poison. We had not reached the end. We had reached the middle. The worst place. Too far to quit. Too far from. Safe. I felt the ambassador lower her forehead against my shoulder for one shaking breath. Not worship. Not surrender. Exhaustion. Maybe apology. Then her hand slid over mine on the wheel. She could barely apply pressure. Her fingers trembled. Her nano-silk light flickered around us like dying stars. But she pushed. With me. The pump answered with another brutal grind. Together, we forced the wheel another inch. The overhead regulator coughed. A pocket of contaminated air tore loose and vanished into the exhaust duct with a ripping hiss. For the first time, the chamber gave back a breath that did not taste entirely like death. I dragged it in. So did she. The sound of her gasp beside me was raw, broken, alive. Then the pump's inner lock slammed against its final stop. Clunk! The entire column shook. A warning light blinked beneath my hands. Back pressure maximum. The next turn would either open the main exhaust gate or rip the manual assembly apart. The ambassador looked at the warning, then at me. Her eyes asked the question her translator could not. I tightened my grip. The wool burned against my gloves. The ship groaned above us. Somewhere beyond the walls, the reactor screamed like dying machinery in the dark. I set my feet. She braced my weight. And together, we pulled into the final turn. The final turn did not open with a heroic roar. It opened with a broken clunk. The pressure wheel moved 1 inch farther beneath our hands, struck the internal stop, and made the whole pump column shudder like something old waking up angry. For 1 terrible second, nothing happened. No air. No release. No mercy. Just my arms locked through the wheel spokes, the ambassador braced against my side, both of us frozen inside the heat while the ship held its breath around us. Then the main exhaust gate opened. The sound was not loud at first. It started as a deep metal groan beneath the floor. A buried mechanism remembering its purpose. Then it became a grinding howl. Then the chamber inhaled. Every speck of grey silicon dust lifted off the floor at once. The air ripped upward in a twisting spiral, dragging poison, steam, coolant vapor, and dead electrical haze into the regulator throat. The overhead duct shrieked so hard my good ear filled with static. The ambassador nearly lost her grip. I felt her weight buckle against me. I held the wheel. She held me. The pump screamed louder. A violent rush of venting gas punched through the ceiling stack, and the chamber's pressure dropped so fast my chest seized. My visor fogged. My ears popped. My lungs dragged at air that was still hot, still dirty, but moving. Moving meant life. For the first time in that sealed death room, the air moved. The sterilization speaker spat broken static. Manual override, accepted. The words came out distorted. Almost ashamed. Emergency exhaust, active. The red strobe lights flickered, blinked, and settled into a dim amber glow. Not safe. Never safe. But no longer execution red. The roar faded by degrees, falling into a low, heavy hum beneath the floor. Recovering emergency power crawled through the old pump column, uneven and weak, vibrating against my forearms where I still had them locked around the wheel. I did not let go. My body did not believe in safety anymore. The wheel could snap back. The gate could fail. The ship could change its mind. So I stayed there, forehead nearly touching the hot metal, shoulders shaking, breath tearing through the damaged respirator in short, ugly pulls. In. Out. In. Not enough. Still better than nothing. Beside me, the ambassador made a sound I almost missed beneath the recovering hum. A gasp. Deep. Raw. Real. Not the controlled breath of a royal figure standing beneath glass and polished light. Not the silent efficiency of an engineered being who believed panic belonged to lesser organisms. This was the sound of someone finding air after already accepting the end. She drew in another breath and shuddered against me. Her hand was still over mine on the wheel. Her fingers trembled so hard they clicked faintly against the damaged glove plating. Slowly, I looked at her. The chamber had changed her? The radiant diplomatic mantle that once looked spun from moonlight and circuitry was darkened by smoke, heat scoring, and radiation flare. The perfect lines of royal armor had gone dull around the edges. Her 6 Nano-silk arms hung behind her like exhausted ribbons of cobalt light, no longer weaving command codes, no longer drawing symbols in the air. They flickered weakly. Alive. Barely. She stared down at the wheel. At my hands. At her hand over mine. For a moment, I thought she would pull away. Old disgust. Old rank. Old instinct screaming that a Larsat ambassador did not cling to a lower-deck human. But she did not move. Her gaze rose to my visor. I knew what she saw. A half-deaf welder in a ruined suit, respirator cracked, shoulders trembling, body pushed far past any reasonable limit. A man held together by stubbornness, manual tools, and the kind of low-deck pain nobody wrote into fleet doctrine. Not elegant. Not advanced. Not pure. Still breathing. Still holding the machine open. Still the reason she was breathing too. The silence between us grew heavier than the heat. Only the chamber spoke. The low hum of emergency power. The slow drip of overheated coolant from a pipe seam. Tap. 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 The distant groan of the collapsing hull settling somewhere far above, each sound rolling through the walls like thunder buried under miles of steel. She tried to speak. Her translator sparked once at her throat. Dead. So her real voice came out instead. Soft. Alien. Broken by heat and thin air. I did not understand the first words. Then she forced one in fleet standard, rough and almost unrecognizable without the machine polishing it. She swallowed. Her eyes dropped again to the wheel, to the old wrench still jammed in the governor teeth, to the crude manual linkage that had done what her royal systems could not. You held death open. I almost laughed. It came out as a cough. No, I rasped. My voice scratched through the respirator. I held a valve. She blinked slowly. That answer seemed to hurt her more than any insult would have. Because it was true. Because there was no divine logic in it. No prophecy. No superior algorithm. No royal lattice. Just pressure, leverage, heat, and hands that knew what to do when machines started lying. Her 6 arms shifted behind her. Only inches. A weak, instinctive attempt to rise into their old shape. They failed. The nearest strand dipped and trembled in the amber light. She looked back at them. I watched the moment return to her. The memory of what she had been. The impossible grace. The command web. The clean corridor above. The way she had looked down through the inspection glass and called me an obsolete carbon mass. Now her entire life was balanced against an old pressure wheel and my failing grip. Her face tightened. Not with anger. With recognition so deep it looked like pain. She lowered her head. Not far. Not a bow. Maybe her pride still had a spine. But it was enough. Enough to make the air between us change. The chamber felt quieter after that. Not safer. Quieter. Like the ship itself was listening. I loosened one hand from the wheel. The mechanism held. I waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. The pump kept humming. The exhaust gate stayed open. Only then did I let my arm slip free. The moment I did, my knees tried to fold. The ambassador caught me before I hit the floor. Her grip was weak, clumsy, almost human. But she caught me. I ended up half against the pump column, half against her shoulder, breathing like a broken engine. She held me there with one hand pressed against my harness and the other trembling near the wheel, ready to help if it moved. The irony sat between us in the amber dark. The royal was bracing the worker. The alien was holding up the carbon mass. The doctrine of 2 civilizations had cracked inside a 12-foot pump room. I looked at her through the smoke. She looked back. No disgust remained. What replaced it was worse. Respect. Terrified, unwanted, irreversible respect. The kind that costs something. Above us, the exhaust duct gave a final ripping hiss as the last dense pocket of contamination tore free and vanished into the vent stack. The air thinned into something breathable. Barely. The ambassador inhaled again, slower this time, and her eye shone with faint bioluminescent wetness. "You should have left me," she whispered. I leaned my head back against the column. The metal was still hot. Everything was still hot. Yeah. My chest rose and fell. I'm bad at following smart plans. Something like a laugh moved through her face. It never reached. Sound. The moment died when the floor beneath us pulsed. Deep. Heavy. Wrong. The emergency terminal across the chamber flickered back to life in the amber gloom. A single warning crawled across its cracked screen. Secondary pressure stack unstable. Manual hold required. The pump wheel jolted half an inch under her hand. The gate tried to close. Both of us turned toward it. The quiet vanished. The next crisis had found us. I pushed myself off her shoulder. She did not let go immediately. For one heartbeat, her fingers tightened on my harness. Not command. Not for alone. A question. Could I stand? Could we do it again? I looked at the warning. Then at the wheel. Then at her. My hands were shaking. So were hers. The pump growled beneath the floor, hungry for another sacrifice. I closed my fingers around the wheel. Her hand came down beside mine. This time, she did not wait for me to force her. This time, she chose it. And together, in the low amber hum of a dying ship, we prepared for the final push. The pump wheel kicked beneath our hands like it wanted to throw us off. I locked my elbows. She locked hers beside mine. For one brutal second, the old machine held us both in place, human grit and alien light trembling against the same impossible pressure. Then the emergency terminal screamed. Not spoke. Screamed. A high-pitched whine tore from the cracked speaker, sharp enough to make my good ear ring and my dead ear feel haunted by sound it could not hear. The screen flashed white. Main propulsion pressure stack unstable. Central defense matrix overload. Final venting failure in 200 seconds. The ambassador read it faster than I did. Her eyes widened. Then every last piece of royal hesitation vanished from her face. She shoved herself upright, one hand still braced on the wheel, 6 damaged nano-silk strands trembling behind her like broken cobalt wires fighting to become wings again. She pointed to the left wall. Then to the pump base. Then to the overhead regulator. Her voice came raw, unfiltered, furious with fear. 3 locks? I stared at her. She slapped the terminal with one shaking hand, forced the cracked display to cycle, and jabbed her finger at the diagram. 3 mechanical release valves fed the main pressure stack from this chamber. 1 at floor level. 1 behind the pump column. 1 above the regulator, 15 feet up, half buried in scorched pipework and vibrating support brackets. All manual. All stuck. All required before the propulsion grid could dump the pressure surge instead of feeding it back into the ship's spine. The terminal wailed again. 180 seconds. The floor rattled under us. Above, somewhere deep in the ship, the drive core began to charge against its own damaged containment. A rising whine filled the chamber. Thin at first. Then sharper. Then hungry. I knew that sound even though I had never stood this close to it before. Machines made that noise when they were building pressure they could not survive. I grabbed my wrench. The ambassador grabbed my harness before I moved. Her fingers dug into the scorched plate. She looked at me, then pointed at herself, then the terminal. She was going to call coordinates. I was going to break the locks. No ceremony. No argument. No rank. Just work. I nodded once. She nodded back. That was the whole covenant. The first valve sat under the pump column, half hidden behind a shield plate warped by heat. I dropped to the floor and slid under the casing on my back. The grating burned through my suit, and the chamber above me flashed amber, red, cobalt, amber again. The ambassador shouted something in her language, then forced the fleet standard words out between desperate gasps. Lower right, 12 inches, retake counter force. I reached blind. My glove hit hot pipe. Then a bracket. Then the valve stem. The metal was slick with condensation and vibrating so hard it blurred under my fingers. I jammed the wrench onto it. The valve did not move. The drive core whine climbed. The deck plates began to rattle in sync with it, a deafening metallic chatter that shook dust from the ceiling in grey streams. 150 seconds, she shouted. I planted one boot against the pump housing, pulled with both hands, and felt white-hot agony fire through my shoulders. The wrench slipped. Sparks spat into my visor. I reset. Pulled again. The valve gave a short, ugly clank. Then another. Steam burst past my helmet and roared into the overhead vent. The first lock opened. The terminal beeped once. Not safe. Progress. I rolled out from under the pump, coughing through the respirator, and stumbled toward the second valve. The ambassador was already there. Not floating. Not commanding from a distance. Crawling around the column on trembling knees, one damaged nano-silk strand wrapped around a pipe brace to keep herself upright. She slapped the wall panel with the side of her hand. Here. The panel had no handle. Of course it didn't. I swung the wrench. Clang. The cover dented. Clang. The hinge snapped. Clang. The panel tore loose and crashed to the floor. Inside, the second valve spun behind a cage of ceramic relay teeth. The relay system sparked with thermal overload, arcs of blue-white energy popping from tooth to tooth. I reached in. She caught my wrist. For a heartbeat, I saw real terror in her eyes. Not for herself. For my hand. That almost stopped me. Almost. I twisted free and drove the wrench through the cage. The high-voltage pop slammed into my arm. My nerves lit up from wrist to spine. My knees buckled. The ambassador caught me under the shoulder, her body shaking under my weight, and screamed something close to my face. I didn't understand the words. But I heard the command. Stand. So I stood. I shoved the wrench deeper, hooked the valve stem, and turned. The relay teeth ground against the steel tool, shrieking like tearing metal. The valve turned 1/4. Half. Then jammed. The drive core's whine sharpened into a piercing scream. The terminal flashed. 110 seconds. Central defense matrix feedback imminent. The ambassador shoved both hands over mine. Her 6 damaged strands flared around the relay cage, not interfacing, not commanding, just shielding the sparks long enough for me to move. Her face twisted with the effort. Cobalt light pulsed down her arms and into the dead mechanism. I pulled. She pushed. The wrench moved. The second valve opened with a heavy clunk, and the chamber shook as pressure rerouted through the floor. A blast of hot gas tore behind the wall. The sound rolled beneath us like thunder trapped in a pipe. 2 locks. 1 left. The last valve was overhead. 15 feet up. No ladder. No lift. Only a scorched maintenance spine bolted into the wall, with half its rungs missing and the rest glowing dull orange from heat. The ambassador looked up. Then at me. She shook her head. I was already moving. My hands found the first rung. Heat bit through the glove. I climbed. The whole chamber swayed beneath me, deck plates buckling with a deafening rattle as the drive core charged toward rupture. Each rung groaned under my weight. Each breath came shorter than the last. Below, the ambassador screamed coordinates. Left. 2 feet. Higher. The lock is behind the white conduit. A pipe above my head split with a wet hiss. Steam blasted across my visor. I turned my face into my shoulder and kept climbing. 10 feet. 12. 14. The wall shook so hard my boot slipped off the rung. For one sickening second, I hung by one hand. The ambassador cried out below. A damaged nano-silk strand shot upward, wrapped around my harness, and held. Not strong. Not enough to lift me. Enough to keep me from falling. I looked down. She stood beneath me with both feet planted, one hand gripping the pump column, her 6 ruined strands stretched to their limit. No dignity. No distance. No disgust. Only effort. Move, she screamed. I moved. I reached the final valve. It was buried behind the white conduit, just like she said, a round manual release wheel locked under a safety pin. I hooked the wrench over the pin and yanked. Nothing. The terminal shouted below. 60 seconds. The drive core scream became a living thing. The chamber light strobed faster. Every wall panel rattled. The floor below the ambassador cracked with a sharp report, and she staggered but did not release her strand from my harness. I hit the safety pin with the wrench. Once. Twice. 3 times. The pin snapped. The valve wheel spun half an inch, then slammed against internal pressure. I wrapped both hands around it. My gloves smoked. My arms shook. The ambassador's voice rose from below, fierce and broken. Counterclockwise. Now. I turned. The wheel fought back with the force of the ship's dying lungs. I turned harder. My shoulders screamed. My vision narrowed. The wrench slipped from my belt and fell, clanging off the wall, bouncing past the ambassador, striking the floor with a final dead ring. No tool now. Just hands. Just heat. Just the last 60 seconds of a life nobody up deck had ever counted. I pressed my chest against the wall, locked my forearms around the valve, and used my whole body. The wheel moved. 1 inch. 2. Below me, the ambassador fed her last cobalt pulse into the pump column. The 3 locks aligned. The terminal stopped screaming. For one impossible breath, there was silence. Then the main pressure stack opened. The sound was colossal. A deep, roaring release tore through the chamber, through the floor, through the walls, through the ship itself. The drive core whine collapsed into a bass thunder as the trapped surge dumped into space instead of ripping back through the propulsion grid. The blast threw me from the wall. Her nano-silk strand snapped tight around my harness. I fell anyway. She hit the floor under me and caught half my weight, both of us crashing down beside the pump column as the chamber filled with rushing air, amber light, and the wild rattle of systems surviving by inches. The terminal flickered. Final vent complete. Defense matrix stabilizing. The roar faded into a low, heavy hum. I lay there against the grating, gasping. She was beside me, one hand still clenched in my harness like she was afraid the ship might steal me if she let go. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The dying machinery kept breathing. So did we. The terminal said we had stabilized the defense matrix. The ship disagreed. The whole chamber lifted under us with a cataclysmic roar, as if some giant hand had struck the hull from below and decided to peel the fleet open by force. I slammed into the pump column. The ambassador hit the grating beside me, her hand still locked in my harness. For one stunned breath, the emergency lights burned amber. Then every light turned white. A pressure line above the access hatch split with a blinding crackle, and a blade of venting plasma tore across the room where our heads had been seconds before. The heat hit like a wall. My respirator shrieked. The ambassador's 6 damaged nano-silk strands flared around her in panic, trying to form a shield with almost nothing left to give. The shield appeared for half a heartbeat. A thin cobalt curve. Beautiful. Fragile. Then the radiation surge from the ruptured line smashed through it. Her light shattered into flickering sparks. She folded backward against the floor, eyes wide, staring at the plasma line as it carved the air between us and the only open hatch. The terminal screamed again. Extraction capsule available. Manual ignition required. Launch window, 40 seconds. I looked through the plasma glare. Past the pump. Past the steaming rupture. Past the warped access hatch that had blown half open when the pressure stack vented. Beyond it, 20 feet down a maintenance throat, a small emergency capsule sat locked in its cradle, old white paint scorched black at the edges. Lower deck capsule. Manual launch. No elegance. No autopilot. No royal interface. Just a steel coffin with thrust locks and a handle. The ambassador saw it too. Then she saw the plasma line crossing the gap. Her lips moved around a silent no. The overhead speaker crackled. 35 seconds. The floor buckled. A heavy bulkhead at the far wall tore loose with a thunderous slam and crushed one of the dead consoles flat. The shock wave rolled across the chamber and threw sparks in every direction. The ship was collapsing around the escape route. I pushed myself up. My legs did not want to hold me. My hands were shaking so badly the world vibrated around my fingers. Every nerve in my body carried the memory of the wheel, the surge, the heat, the back pressure, the long fight against machinery that should have killed us 10 different ways. I stood anyway. The ambassador grabbed my arm. Not commanding. Pleading. She shook her head, hard, her eyes bright with terror and exhausted understanding. She knew what I was about to do. She knew the switch was on the far side of the plasma line. She knew her shield was gone. She knew mine had never existed. I looked at the capsule. Then at her. Run when I pull you. She did not understand the words. But she understood me. The speaker screamed. 30 seconds. I tore the wrench from the floor. The metal was warped, blackened, almost too hot to hold, but it was still mine. I wrapped my fingers around it and moved. The plasma line snapped across the chamber with a violent hiss, bright blue-white, spitting arcs into the walls. The air around it shimmered like reality melting under pressure. I lowered my shoulder. The ambassador cried out behind me. I sprinted. The first step felt impossible. The second tore a sound out of me I did not recognize. The third took me into the heat. White-hot agony flooded my nervous system. Not a sharp pain. Not one place. Everywhere. Like the plasma had reached inside every signal my body used to stay human and turned them all into lightning. My vision blew out to white. My suit alarms went insane. Radiation surge. Thermal overload. Respirator failure. I stopped hearing them as separate sounds. They became one long mechanical scream. I drove through it. The wrench came up in both hands. The manual ignition switch was mounted on the wall beside the hatch, protected under a warped safety cage glowing dull orange from heat. I swung. Clang. The cage dented. The plasma line snapped against the floor behind me, carving a black scar through the grating. I swung again. Clang. The safety cage broke loose. My knees buckled. I caught myself against the wall, felt the heat punch through my glove, and rammed the wrench handle down on the ignition switch. Nothing happened. For one frozen second, the capsule stayed dead. Then the thrust locks engaged. The sound was violent and beautiful. K-chunk. 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 The escape capsule lit up in dirty blue. The cradle released with a heavy hydraulic bellow. The speaker howled. Launch window, 20 seconds. I turned back. The ambassador was still on the far side of the plasma line, crouched beneath the pump column, too weak to cross, too proud to crawl, too terrified to move. Above her, the ceiling frame split open. A section of hull plating dropped 6 feet and caught on a support brace, hanging directly over her in a storm of sparks. I forgot the pain. Not because it stopped. Because there was no room for it. I ran back through the plasma glare. The second pass hit worse. My breath vanished. My nerves overloaded so hard my fingers almost opened around the wrench. I shoved through the burning pressure, reached her, and grabbed the front of her scorched mantle. Her eyes locked on mine. For one instant, all the old distance tried to return. Royal. Worker. Alien. Human. Then the hanging plate above her gave a final crack. She threw both arms around my shoulders. I pulled. Not gently. Not cleanly. I dragged her upright, turned my back toward the falling heat, and drove us toward the hatch. The plasma line surged again. This time it struck the remaining glow of her nano-silk strands and my suit at the same moment. Cobalt light exploded across my arms. The ambassador gasped against my shoulder. Something impossible happened. The light did not bounce away. It sank in. A cold fire rushed through my spine, down my arms, through my chest, through the old scars under my suit, locking with every overloaded nerve the surge had already lit. I felt her power tear loose from its dying lattice. Not as command. Not as code. As raw survival energy. It poured into me. My knees hit the edge of collapse. Then held. The chamber slowed. The roar deepened. The falling sparks sharpened into individual stars. My body, the same battered carbon frame she had called obsolete, answered the alien current like it had been waiting under all that damage for one final order. Move. So I moved. I lifted her fully off the floor. Her weight vanished under the surge. I carried her through the hatch as the bulkhead behind us folded inward with a thunderous crash. The maintenance throat twisted around us. 10 feet to the capsule. 8. 6. The launch speaker inside the pod screamed. 10 seconds. The capsule door was half sealed. I kicked it open. The impact shook up my leg, but the door flew wide and slammed against the inner wall. I threw her inside first. She hit the seat harness and reached back for me with both hands. Not above me. Not away from me. Toward me. The thrust locks began to cycle. 9. 8. 7. I grabbed the outer rail and hauled myself in. A plasma surge blasted through the maintenance throat behind us, filling the hatchway with white-blue fury. The capsule door tried to close. It jammed on a bent frame. Of course. I slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing. The ambassador reached past me, one failing nano-silk thread wrapping around the inner handle. Too weak. I planted both boots against the floor, grabbed the manual release lever, and pulled. The lever resisted. The launch timer hit 3. My whole body lit with impossible cobalt fire. I roared and tore the lever down. The door slammed shut. The capsule fired. Thrust locks exploded loose with a brutal bang, and the pod launched down the escape rail as the chamber behind us vanished into roaring light. The force smashed me backward into the ambassador's arms. For one breath, there was no ship. No deck. No empire. Only acceleration, desperate gasps, and her trembling hands holding on to the obsolete human who had carried her out of death's mouth. Through the small cracked viewport, the lower fleet tore away behind us in a storm of firelit metal. Inside the capsule, cobalt light pulsed under my skin like a second heartbeat. The ambassador stared at it. Then at her own dimming arms. Her royal power was fading from her. And waking inside me. The capsule stabilized with a sound too gentle for what we had survived. A low hum. A soft correction burn. A thin, rhythmic chime from the navigation core as it fought to keep us from spinning into the debris field behind the dying fleet. I lay half across the floor, half against the emergency seat, breathing like the air had edges. Each inhale scraped through the damaged respirator. Each exhale came out shaking. The ambassador sat across from me in the acceleration harness, one hand pressed against the wall, the other curled against her chest where her 6 nano-silk arms had dimmed into faint cobalt threads. They no longer floated. They trembled. Like exhausted wires after a storm. Outside the cracked viewport, the lower belly of the warship burned in silence. No sound in space. Only light. Chunks of armor drifted past us, spinning slow, each one reflecting flashes of blue, orange, and white from the collapsing hull. The ship that had buried me for years under pipes and pressure alarms was tearing itself apart in beautiful silence. Inside the pod, everything sounded too close. The hum of the stabilizers. The wet click of my respirator valve. The ambassador's ragged breathing. The faint pulse under my own skin. Cobalt light moved beneath my suit plating in thin lines, spreading across my arms, my neck, my chest, crawling through old scar pathways like a second nervous system learning my shape. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. But not from weakness alone. Power lived there now. Her power. Royal Lasat energy, threaded through a low-deck human body that should have collapsed 10 minutes ago. Across from me, she stared at the glow with hollow eyes. Not angry. Not accusing. Lost. The transfer was real. The thing neither of us understood had followed us into the capsule. Her supremacy was dimming in her own body. And waking in mine. She swallowed and tried to sit straighter. The movement failed halfway. Her shoulders slumped against the harness. For the first time, she looked small inside her own title. The capsule chimed again. 3 tones. Then the onboard computer woke with an old synthetic voice, flat and damaged. Emergency extraction complete. A pause. Identity conflict detected. The ambassador lifted her head. My good ear caught the change in her breathing. She recognized the protocol tone. The computer continued. Biological command signature mismatch. Royal Lasat authority detected in an authorized carbon vessel. The pod lights turned cold white. The air seemed to freeze. Not literally. The heat was still trapped in the panels, the floor still warm from launch, the walls still ticking with residual stress. But the feeling changed. The whole capsule became a courtroom. The ambassador's eyes snapped toward me. Then toward the screen above the hatch. Symbols unfolded across it. Lasat script. Fleet standard translations flickered beneath. My own name appeared first. Not the name my mother gave me. My work registry. Lower deck high pressure welder. Biological class, carbon labor asset. Then her name appeared. Ambassadorial bloodline. LA-SAT electromagnetic web thrown. Temporary status, diminished. She flinched at that word. Diminished. The pod chimed again. A rhythmic, echoing data download began to pulse through the walls. Ding. 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 The screen opened a sealed archive. The label burned cold across the display. Event origin, pressure deck cascade. Authorization, Royal House Internal Security. I went still. The ambassador whispered one word in her own language. No. The archive expanded. Images filled the screen. Not the battle outside. Not the parasite machines. Older footage. Lower decks. Workers in patched hazard suits. Pressure tunnels like the ones I had crawled through all my life. Then a laboratory diagram of human carbon tissue under acid exposure. A design study. A damage study. A phrase appeared beneath it. Mechanical labor hardening program. My heartbeat slowed. The capsule hum deepened around me. I stared at the screen until the letters stopped looking like language and started looking like something the universe had carved into my chest years ago. Acid exposure trials. Auditory overload calibration. High pressure reflex conditioning. Lower deck survivability enhancement. Every line clicked into place with the old aches in my body. The burns across my chest. The dead silence in my left ear. The way supervisors had called it an accident. The way the medical board had signed me back to work before I could stand without shaking. The way the fleet had needed men who could survive leaks longer than clean officers. The archive kept scrolling. My service incident was not an incident. It was a test. A low-deck program built from Royal Security Doctrine, designed to see how long human workers could function under thermal overload, pressure collapse, and chemical exposure after automated systems failed. My scars were not the cost of war. They were data. The ambassador's face emptied. Her damaged nano-silk threads went almost dark. The screen shifted again. Another file opened. LA-SAT Royal Contribution, Biological Endurance Modeling. Approved by Ambassadorial House Predecessor Council. Her lips parted. A shaky exhale left her body. Not speech. Something breaking without sound. I looked at her. She could not look away from the screen. The pod continued its soft, merciless chime. Ding. 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 More proof. Royal seals. Command signatures. Funding transfers. Fleet labor modifications hidden inside protective adaptation research. The systems that had hurt me had not come from one cruel officer or one broken deck. They came from a doctrine. From a house. From a civilization that had looked at human endurance and decided to harvest it. The ambassador slowly unfastened her harness. Her hand shook so badly the clasp rattled 3 times before it released. She slid from the seat and hit the floor on her knees. Not a theatrical fall. Not royal performance. Just gravity finding someone who no longer had a throne inside herself. Her head bowed. Her shoulders shook once. Then again. She tried to speak. Her dead translator sparked at her throat. No translation came. Only her own voice, stripped raw by smoke, oxygen starvation, and guilt. I did not know. The words came in broken fleet standard. Barely there. I stared at her. My hand still glowed with her stolen cobalt power. My chest still rose and fell against the pain her empire had helped design into me. Outside the viewport, the fleet burned in silence. Inside, the truth was louder than any explosion. She lifted her face. Bioluminescent tears tracked down through soot and ash-dark residue on her cheeks, catching the cold podlight in faint blue lines. I looked at your scars, she whispered. Her voice cracked. And I called them primitive. The capsule hummed. The archive kept scrolling. She looked from the screen to me like she wanted me to give her a punishment big enough to hold the guilt. I had none ready. No speech. No rage. No clean human answer. I only had the memory of her hand over mine on the pressure wheel. Her body catching mine under the final valve. Her last light holding me above the fall. Truth and rescue sat between us, both alive, both unbearable. The computer chimed again. Royal Reclamation Beacon detected. The cold white lights turned red. The screen changed. Incoming LA-SAT Sanctuary vessel. Biological command violation confirmed. Carbon vessel carrying royal power. Subject to purge review. The ambassador stopped breathing. A shadow crossed the viewport. Massive. Silent. A vessel shaped like a black cathedral slid between the capsule and the stars, its hull threaded with cold violet light. The LA-SAT had found us. Her eyes met mine. Whatever apology had been forming died in the red glow. She understood before I did. The archive had exposed the past. The beacon had condemned the present. To her people, I was no longer a worker. I was a contamination event carrying royal power in a human frame. She rose unsteadily, one hand braced against the pod wall, the other pressed over the dim strands at her back. Her voice came soft. Terrified. Resolved. They will erase you. The capsule docking clamps locked with a heavy, final clank. My glowing hands curled slowly into fists. She looked at them. Then at me. And in the red light of the approaching sanctuary, the broken ruler who had learned the truth of my scars made her final choice before the door even opened. The docking clamps locked around the capsule like the jaws of a silent god. Clank! 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 Each sound traveled through the floor, through my boots, through the cobalt pulse still burning under my skin. The Larsat sanctuary vessel swallowed our little emergency pod whole. No turbulence. No welcome. Just pressure equalizing, cold light spreading over the walls, and the majestic hum of sublight engines surrounding us like a cathedral waking in deep space. The ambassador stood between me and the hatch. Not tall anymore. Not in the old way. Her posture still carried royalty, but it had been stripped down to something raw and final. A ruler with no army inside her voice. A survivor with ash-dark armor, dimming nano-silk, and eyes that had seen the truth beneath every polished doctrine she had been raised to defend. The capsule door split open. Cold white mist rolled in. Beyond it waited 12 Larsat execution guards in black ceremonial armor, their helmets smooth, their weapons silent, their six-arm combat lattices shining with perfect violet energy. Behind them stood the council herald. Thin. Motionless. Ancient. His voice entered the capsule through the air itself. Royal. Power has been detected inside an unauthorized carbon vessel. The words did not echo. They froze. I pushed myself upright. The cobalt glow under my hands brightened, answering the threat before I did. Every guard shifted. Weapons rose. The ambassador lifted one trembling hand. Stand down. Her voice was weak. But it was hers. No translator. No polish machine. Just her. The herald turned his faceless helm toward her. You have been compromised. She looked at me once. Only once. In that single glance, the whole journey passed between us. The glass corridor. The insult. The sealed room. The burning pressure. The pump wheel beneath our hands. The manual valves. The plasma line. The archive. My scars turned into data by people who never had to hear a pressure pipe scream. Her eyes held all of it. Then she stepped forward. He did not steal royal power, she said. Her breath shook. I gave him survival. And survival answered. The guards did not lower their weapons. The herald's voice called further. Transfer violation. Bloodline contamination. Imperial law requires immediate purge review. I took one step toward her. She did not turn. But one of her dim nano-silk strands reached back and touched my wrist. Barely. A thread of cobalt warmth. A warning. Do not. The sanctuary hall beyond the capsule stretched out in impossible scale, a black nave lit by vertical rivers of violet light. Far above, stars moved through a glass ceiling 200 feet high, cold and endless. My old world had been pipes, rust, heat, and alarms. Hers was judgment carved into architecture. The herald raised one hand. A ring of light opened beneath her feet. Restraint field. My body moved before thought. I grabbed the hatch frame. Cobalt power surged down my arms, bright enough to make every guard flinch. For one terrible second, I could have crossed the distance. I felt it. The impossible strength from the transfer. The alien current braided through my damaged human nerves. The power of a throne waking in a worker's hands. Then she looked back. Her eyes stopped me. Not fear. Command. Not the old kind. The earned kind. If you fight now, she whispered, they will turn your life into proof that humans cannot hold power without becoming monsters. The words hit harder than the radiation surge. I froze. Her lips curved, almost a smile, almost grief. You saved me with a wrench, she said. Do not let them make you answer with a weapon. The restraint field closed around her. Violet light wrapped her wrists, her shoulders, the dim ruins of her nano-silk arms. She did not resist. The herald spoke. Ambassadorial subject will be returned to the High Sanctuary for memory audit, power severance, and eternal stasis pending council judgment. My breath stopped. Eternal stasis. The old phrase meant no trial. No return. A living monument. A frozen warning. The ambassador did not look at the herald. She looked at me. The fading static of the capsule radio hissed behind us, catching the last broken fragments of the battlefield transmission outside. Lower fleet distress beacon. Manual override recorded. Human biological vessel. Royal archive recovered. The truth was already moving. Somewhere in the debris field. Somewhere in backup relays. Somewhere beyond the reach of one throne. The record of what they had done to my people had escaped with us. She knew. So did I. That was her final choice. Not death. Transmission. Legacy. The guards pulled her toward the sanctuary corridor. I stepped after her once. My knees nearly failed. Every muscle screamed from the old fight, but I stayed standing. She turned her head, walking backward for one slow step while the violet field pulled her away. The cold light made her look almost like she had when I first saw her above the lower deck. Radiant. Untouchable. But now I knew the truth. She had touched soot. She had held a pressure wheel. She had caught a falling welder with the last light in her body. She had learned that carbon did not bow just because empires wrote laws against it. Your name, she said suddenly. The hall went still. The guards paused as if the question itself violated protocol. I stared at her. All that time, buried under alarms and heat and impossible machinery. She had never asked. My throat tightened. Elias Voss. She breathed it in. Not as data. Not as a registry. As a vow. Elias Voss, she repeated. Then the herald struck her with silence. A pale field sealed around her face, cutting off her voice, her breath, her final word. The guards dragged her through the corridor. I followed as far as the hatch threshold, where two weapons crossed before my chest. Beyond them, the sanctuary opened its inner chamber. A vertical vault of black crystal descended from the ceiling. Inside it waited a column of frozen light. Her prison. Her shrine. Her punishment. She did not struggle when they placed her inside. The violet restraints vanished. For one heartbeat, she was free. She lifted her hand and pressed it against the transparent field between us. I lifted mine. The cobalt power under my skin answered. Across 50 feet of guarded air, across two species, across every law that said we were not meant to stand equal. Our light met. Her dim strands flared one last time. Not bright. Not royal. Human warm. The stasis field ignited. Cold swept over her from the floor upward, turning motion into stillness, breath into silence, grief into a perfect frozen shape. Her eyes stayed open. They found mine through the crystal. The memory audit was supposed to empty them. Erase the lower deck. Erase the pump. Erase my name. But as the cold climbed higher, I saw one impossible thing remain. Recognition. A tiny cobalt spark in the center of her gaze. The field sealed. The chamber went silent. No scream. No ceremony. Only the deep hum of the sanctuary engines and my own final breath shaking inside a cracked respirator. The herald turned toward me. You will be escorted to human custody. The council will decide what to do with the power inside you. I looked past him, at the frozen ambassador in the black crystal vault. Then at my hands. The glow beneath my skin was steady now. Not borrowed. Not stolen. Carried. Outside the sanctuary windows, the void stretched forever, full of wreckage, stars, and the slow approach of rescue signals blinking from the human fleet. The universe had thrown thermal overload at us. Oxygen starvation. Collapsing hull. Dying machinery. An empire's contempt. And still, somehow, a low-deck welder and a fallen alien ruler had forced one more breath out of death. I turned away from the vault. Not because I was done looking. Because if I stayed, I would break. My boots echoed across the sanctuary floor. Heavy. Human. Alive. Behind me, sealed in eternal cold, she carried my name into the silence. Inside me, her cobalt fire carried the truth back to the stars. And I understood then that legends are not born when empires kneel. They are born when one scarred hand refuses to let go of the wheel. The void remembers every light it fails to kill.